Are you experiencing back pain that you can't get rid of? Getting migraines, vertigo, having trouble sleeping, and/or brain fog? Do you feel like your medical doctor doesn't understand your condition? Blair Chiropractic might be the solution you've been looking for. If you've ever been skeptical about this, the two doctors you're about to listen to were even more skeptical than you were when they looked into chiropractic work. But fear not. Get expert guidance from the blonde and the bald, Doctors Beth Bagley and Frederick Scherger. These two doctors have extensive experience beyond the healthcare realm and bringing unique vision and healing to their patients. What do you have when you get a biological analyst and an engineer together? Find out right here on another episode of The Blonde and the Bald. Welcome your hosts, Doctors Bagley and Scherger.
Welcome, folks, to The Blonde and the Bald. I'm Dr. Frederick Scherger. We've got Dr. Beth Bagley here, and most importantly, we have Dr. Craig Backs with us today to share some of his expertise in the medical side of things for heart health, general health, I think, as we're going to be, I'm excited to have him on. So, Doc, I'm just going to let you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what your practice is like, and then, we'll ask any questions.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to interact with your audience. I'm a 67-year-old general internist. I've been practicing for about 40 years with no plans for retirement. For the first 30 years or so of my career, I practiced mainstream general internal medicine, dealing with the consequences of chronic disease. At that time, it was a problem, but it's not the same, epidemic problem that it is now. About 10 years ago, I discovered that arterial disease is far more reversible, preventable than I ever thought. Kind of blew my mind. But put me in a position where I either had to change everything or ignore the evidence. So I changed everything about my practice and decided to focus on reversing arterial disease as opposed to just managing its decline and watching its consequences. So without going into a lot of the details, I learned that arterial disease, the most common cause of disability and death, that's stroke and heart attack, and type 2 diabetes are chronic inflammatory conditions that are driven by things that we do to ourselves, the food we eat, the way we live our lives, the toxins that we encounter more so than anything. Let me put it this way, it's not a medication deficiency disease. Right. And I learned, the science of it, the medicine of it, and then I spent the last 10 years in hopefully improving the accessibility to it. The basis of it is called the Baldwin method. Anybody who's interested in reading a book about it, you can pick up Healthy Heart, Healthy Brain. I haven't written a book, but I would cite that as probably the best authority that I can mention. But much of my website is also based on the principles in that book, the CureCenter.life, for those that are interested for more background. So for the last 10 years, I've been focusing on reversing arterial disease and type 2 diabetes. I'm happy to report that it was just in the last year that I had my first patient suffer an acute coronary syndrome that led to a stent, my first patient that suffered a TIA. But other than that, I've had none of our patients have suffered these extremely common events, and I'm very proud of having with that track record. And now see the need to get over my fear of bragging and tell the truth and let people know that it is possible.
And that's been one of the foundations of health is, I believe it goes back to as far as Voltaire, that sort of establishes, for many doctors, at least in that day and age, was to fool the patient until they got well. And now we have been fooled by our food supplies and things like that, that it's hard to get well until we start realizing, oh, wait a second, we just need to eat real food. So, and you're right, you've been, we've been interacting here in Springfield on and off for the past decade or so, since you opened your practice. And one of the things that, is common, I hear about is, how often someone needs to go in for a stint. So if you've got 10 years with your first cases, which invariably you're going to have some of those time to time, that's fantastic. That's just great to hear. So, now, before that, when you were at, I think, St. John's here in town, is that correct?
Well, I practiced for about 30 years as a general internist with a group practice. Gone through a number of different iterations, sort of not Springfield Clinic, not SIU School of Medicine. We were sort of a
Got it.
independent group, but so to speak. But I spent 3 years as chief medical officer at St. John's
Right.
Hospital, so it was more of an administrative role, trying to herd the doctor cats and keep the troublemakers in line, so to
Sure.
speak.
Sure. So I guess what has changed, well, two things. One, what changed your mind from what is unfortunately the traditional medical practice to what you're doing right now? What was sort of the mindset that got you there?
My own personal need, actually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I came across opportunity to get my carotid arteries scanned with ultrasound, and it showed that I have the same problem that my father, my uncles, my grandfather all had, and that's atherosclerosis. Now, fortunately, I found out before I had an event, and I caused me to ask, well, what else should I be doing? I was taking medications. I didn't have high blood pressure. I was beyond overweight. I was obese. I was about 235. I went investigating a bit further, asked the company that did the sonogram, okay, what more should I do? And they said, you want to go to this preceptorship called the Bale-Deneen method. And I went really thinking, well, this is probably, I'm going to be felt like I've been scammed because the sponsors, actually the leaders said they offered a money back guarantee if anybody had a heart attack or a stroke under their care, that they would refund their significant annual concierge medicine fee, several $1,000s, and they'd only written one check in the last 8 years. But when they presented the information, the data, the medical, the studies that showed how foundational lifestyle is, how effective it is, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I still prescribe medications. I recommend supplements to be for targeted or identified deficiencies, but it was convincing. And so when I returning home, I remember I told my wife, you have to drive because I have to go through all this information, outline, and come up with a plan for implementing in my practice. And so it's only taken about 10 years to get there, but I think I figured out most of it. I was always learning new things every day, but the struggle is trying to overcome the mainstream school of thought that this is an inevitably progressive condition. It's so common, therefore it's inevitable.
Right.
It's normal, but it's certainly not optimal, and it is optional.
Yeah, because I've heard it so many times. Like you said, you've been helping not only with arterial disease but type 2 diabetes. So many people hear, "Oh, I've got type 2 diabetes," and they're just going to take insulin or something else, opposed to saying, "Hey, you can manage it and you can reverse it." And yet, so many doctors are also told you can't do anything about it. They can't change their diet. So I'd like to know a little bit about your dietary protocols that you work with on people to help make those changes.
Well, first of all, I think the sort of fatalistic, nihilistic attitude that patients won't change is just that. I mean, Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so I think, yes, there are patients, it is difficult, mostly because of our culture, to overcome the influences that cause people to eat. And by the way, I spell it PHOOD for food.
Yes.
And you use the word fool, the patient, it's PHOOL, to be followed by PHARMA. So food, fooling, and into the pharma. It's a business model.
It very much is.
Wow.
And it's been very successful, and it's getting more successful all the time. I just tell patients, look, you can choose whether to participate in that or not. It's your choice. Now, this is simple, but it's not necessarily easy. It needs support.
Right.
So going to the, I try to keep it simple. I don't employ a nutritional counselor. First of all, if they're certified, they're doomed or deemed to give the wrong advice. I've had a conversation with a certified dietitian in a CrossFit gym one Saturday morning, probably 7-8 years ago, and I asked her how she eats. She said paleo, And I said, well, is that how you teach your patients? And she said, no, I'd lose my license.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
So
gosh.
they was held to the food pyramid. And so that was just like, okay, this is really not about the patient as a customer, as a beneficiary of our care. They really are the product. And if you look at the recommendations from the American Diabetes Association, the food pyramid, it's you can only conclude that the purpose of the clientele or the constituency of the American Diabetes Association is not people with diabetes, but the disease of diabetes. And the more diabetes we have, the bigger their influence, the bigger their budgets, the bigger everything. And everybody loves growth, when it comes to their own business. So
Yep.
I think that the key. So I tell my patients, I call them the badasses. When it comes to nutrition, it's the sweets, the starches, and the snacks.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean the processed snacks is the processed foods and eating all the time. So we try to get our patients to try to eat within, I call it window feeding, intermittent fasting, try to eat within a 6 to 8 hour window every day. Shorter the better. Some days some days easier than others. You got to get into social situations where you're going to have to make adjustments. But for the most part, just don't eat all the time. We weren't programmed or evolved to graze. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors gave us their genes. They were perfectly adapted to their environment. They used to alternating with fasting or a famine. And so we have to hack that software back to by our behavior. We can't go with the flow of the 3 meals a day and free snacking and sugary processed food. So sugar is enemy number one. Starch turns into sugar, so don't eat any white foods other than cauliflower, which is actually a pretty good substitute for the potatoes and the rice. And then sitting is the fourth S. See, and then let's see. Seed oils. So I have nine S's. So sweet starches, snacks, sitting, seed oils, and then sleep is important. Get plenty of it. Salt, and I'm a little less strident about salt because I think salt is kind of taking the hit while sugar has been doing the damage.
Right.
Yes.
And what did I leave out? Smoking. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that makes 9. So, and people seem to be able to remember that, and even though it's not particularly, one of the things that I find too often is that when I'm dealing with my colleagues is that we try to impart information. It's we say it's for the patient's benefit, but it's really to prove how smart we are. So we tout data, we tout studies, we tout this, that, and the other. And really, I think the role of a teacher or a coach is I see my role is more of, okay, here's where you suck, here's where you need to improve.
Right.
Here, I shouldn't say it that way, but it's like, I go back to my high school basketball coach, who used to tell me I stink all the time. But point is, it's like, here's where you can improve, here's how you improve, here's how we measure your improvement, repeat.
Yeah.
And so, one of the tools that I find one of the key things is to be very visual and data driven in our approach. So, Fred, you're very familiar with our in-body, which we call the judge, the body composition analysis. We can talk about, are you too fat or too thin? The diet, the machine gives you a number, and then what do we want to do with that number is make it better.
Well, and one thing on the in-body that I think is probably, certainly for myself, as someone who's trying to be strong and trying to, get stronger, I could get on a body fat scale to see what the body fat percentage is. But what I didn't appreciate until I started, and the reason I use the in-body so frequently is because I'm really focusing on that muscle mass component. Because the more that I learn, you've got 17 years on me, but that doesn't mean a whole lot because I'm already past 35 by several. And the problem ends up being is it is so hard to build body mass as you get older, as you're well aware, which is why are you still at the CrossFit gym?
No, I'm a little embarrassed to say my physical exercise has been a little bit put off. I've had both my hips replaced, some back surgery and neck surgery in the last 3 years. And so, it's excuses that they're poor excuses. I could do better, but
exactly. But you're as well aware that if you don't keep that muscle mass as you age, it's going to deteriorate faster and faster, and ultimately that's going to lead to more mortality and morbidity, really. So again, that number there alone, when I see that number, even if my scale goes up and my fat percentage goes up, and the muscle mass goes up, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to complain about that too much. It's when that number goes down and the fat percentage goes up, like it did when I stopped by the other day, then I'm just like, oh, I need to fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. So when you discovered that, I mean, I know you already knew you were in an unhealthy state and then got that information that made you, okay, this is the time to change. How long did it take you to turn that around? And do you use that to help your patients? Do you use that experience?
Yeah, actually, so this thing, I'm trying to remember the sequence. My own fitness journey really started before my realization about the arterial disease, and that was Mike Sodolnik, who was a CrossFit coach. He saw my picture. And he said he was offended by my fatness, and he came to my office one day and he said, why is it you? I won't use the expletive. Doctors take better care of yourselves. And so long story short, he had an idea that he was my coach, and he taught me, it's like, hey, look, you need to be a better example. You can't expect people to follow advice from a fat, doctor. And yet you see fat nutrition, fat, nurses, and still fat doctors as well. So the point is, people spot hypocrisy and they aren't inspired by it. So I lost 70 pounds in probably less than 6 months.
Nice.
But that was rather intense. But I do remember the one thing that he said. He lied to me the first day. He said 80% of your weight reduction is not going to be exercise; it's going to be what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
But the lie was it's actually more like 90% or more is what you eat, not the exercise. And six packs are made in the kitchen, not in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of true, but it's more true than not, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's been borne out in my practice as I follow patients, and besides their body composition, we also follow a number of laboratory tests, a lot focusing on chronic inflammation, but more visually, the carotid ultrasound showing the thickness and I call it the thickness and sickness of the artery wall. And so when we follow those things, we can kind of show people their results and the benefits of what they're doing in kind of a cyclical way. And then, so I think I kind of got a little bit off track there, but I think one of the key things to behavior modification is identify the behavior, set a realistic goal. And I'm not a believer in saying you need to lose 10 pounds. I believe the only thing that really makes any sense to me is, you need to be, you need to be less fat than you were a week from now. You need to be less fat than you are today.
Yeah.
And some people that might be a half pound, some people that might be 3 pounds, but it just, how much fat, less, how much exercise, more, it's really not about a specific target, because eventually, incrementally, you'll get there. And the other thing, I think, from a behavior modification point of view, I've discovered that very few people are going to do what I was sort of enabled, almost forced to do, embarrassed into, shamed into doing, frankly, to change things almost like 180 degrees. It's going to be a series of nudges.
Yes.
Can we make this change? What can you do? Okay, you can't do that. Can you do this? And that's been far more successful for most patients.
And I think this goes back to the situation with people like us. We see the data, we understand the data, and maybe that makes us more highly motivated to make those changes, and we'll do the hard things because we know on the other end of it, it's going to be there. Whereas the average patient hasn't been challenged to do those hard things. I mean, the reason that they're in their situation is because they haven't been doing the hard things, that, they haven't been making the meal choices that are a little bit harder, waiting till get home to make dinner, opposed to picking up something along the way. Buying the fast food, or not the fast and processed food at the grocery store, opposed to something that you can cook at home, or for that matter, just getting out and going to the gym. So we have to help, like you said, a lot of it is a coaching to help them understand how we are making the change and helping them along the right direction. because they've never experienced that, or it's been several decades since they've experienced that.
I think one of the things that I try to counter all the time is sort of the bigotry of low expectations, seeing somebody who's 40, 50, maybe 100 pounds overweight and say, well, you can't change. And I think, we need to give everybody a chance. Now, some people are going to continue to disappoint themselves and us, and, but at the same time, I think, the set point should be, look, this can get better, and, people need to be hopeful, but at the same time be held accountable. That's why I never let a patient leave my office without having set their next follow-up appointment, where we're going to see what the results of these changes that we made. And sometimes it's a 1 or 2 week follow-up appointment I call it, come to see the judge, get on the in-body, or 3 months, to do their labs, which unfortunately, I do operate within an insurance model to make this accessible to more people, but unfortunately that drives some of the intervals by which we can do laboratory testing. But it gives them a target, to at least know when they need to start cramming for finals, when they need to start, following their nutrition advice and exercise, et cetera. But and the other beauty about things like the in-body is I don't have to get into debates with patients about what are they doing. I just show them the numbers and say, is this what you expected?
Just for the listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain the in-body?
So the in-body is a body composition analyzer. It uses bioimpedance absorption to do essentially what a CT scanner does with radiation absorption. The in-body absorbs, measures the absorption of electrical energy in multiple vectors and creates an electrical picture of the body that is correlated with things like DEXA or other measurements of body composition. It gives you a report. Let me see if I can, before I share my screen, inbodyusa.com. So, and ours happens to be these are newer models, but the InBody 570 looks something like this. And you stand on the platform, these electrodes in the hands transmit the energy, and you get a report. I don't know if they'll show the report here. Get a report that looks something like this that enables us to show the skeletal muscle mass. This is unfortunately a C pattern where there's more fat and less muscle, where our strive for everything lining up. And then we can follow that information over time.
Nice.
So I have one here in my office, and it's not an inexpensive investment, but I think I view it as I bought a robot that does what an employee does in terms of nutrition counseling for less than $10,000 7 years ago. So that's I've considered pretty good ROI.
And I like it just because it is unlike a DEXA, where you are getting it is a radiation dose. I think is it every 3 months or every 6 months before they really want to let you do another DEXA?
I'm not as familiar with DEXA. I mean, I had one. That was my first body composition analysis, and then I discovered the in-body.
Right.
It's like a DEXA is what, $100,000.
Probably.
It's weighs half a ton. It's not going to, I mean, the in-body, it's not extremely portable, but you can move it and take it other places and, do events with it, that sort of thing. So, there's no harm. There's only 2 contraindications. One is implanted, defibrillators or pacemakers or spine stimulators, those kinds of things, and pregnancy. And frankly, I think those are mostly driven by the lawyers wanting to avoid all risk.
Sure.
I mean, I think we may have had an accidental patient or two who was, get on it without any consequences, but we do try to follow those restrictions.
Right.
Still leaves a lot of people who can benefit from it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And like you were saying, especially with the insurance model, you would like to test more often to see, the changes that they made within the month, because often within a month, you can make significant changes in diet to affect those things. But with the in-body, you can do that on a regular basis with really no impact. So I was gonna, where was I gonna go?
I have a couple of questions.
You go.
I'm feverishly writing down questions. So we've had a couple podcasts that we've talked about ways that people can stabilize their blood sugars. And I just want to know your opinion on people using continuous blood glucose monitors. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's too much information? What do you think?
No, I think it's an awesome tool. It's underutilized. Unfortunately, typically insurance payment doesn't kick in until somebody's type 1 or type 2 diabetic on insulin. So it's like once the horse is not only out of the barn, but into the next state, now we'll pay for this. But it's a relatively small investment if patients need a prescription for it. I think it still costs maybe $70 for a month what better information to find out, I eat this and my sugars, my glucose skyrockets. Or if I fast, my glucose doesn't really tank out. So I think the feedback is invaluable. And the faster they can get that feedback, the better.
Yeah.
And the more repetitively. And so I think it's very helpful. I think, quite frankly, certainly anybody with arterial disease, and I think you've reminded me that I probably need to recommend it more often, should have that information, because long before people have elevated blood glucose, they have insulin resistance. And in fact, I always tell patients, look, there's very few of us that don't have insulin resistance. It's actually a feature, not a bug in our software. And going back to our hunter-gatherer existence, it's a system that works well to intermittently have energy source, store that energy for later use and then expenditure. But it's not a good system for constant energy intake, especially in the form of highly processed sugary food. It's actually counterproductive, and it stores all that energy as fat, our liver, around our internal organs, which of course we know is inflammatory fat. So, number one, forget cholesterol, high blood pressure. Number one cause for chronic inflammation is insulin resistance, combined with a culture that tells us to eat all this junk, do it all the time, and indulge your dopamine receptors in the brain, and feel good until you don't feel good. It's like, it is a drug. And clearly we need an addiction model, frankly, to overcome it for the most part. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Go back to the CGM. It's always instructional. Now, if it's ignored, that's one thing. But I think the sooner somebody is aware of how this food impacts our blood glucose, but more importantly, how it impacts insulin levels, because it's hyperinsulinemia that is the inflammatory driver, not the elevated glucose. Glucose happens to be the thing we can measure easily. Insulin is not so easily measured, and standardization is not so easy, and we need to kind of compare it to how it is relative to the glucose. And it's a little bit more complicated. You have the HOMA-IR testing that can be done as a surrogate for insulin resistance. But frankly, I look at it this way: the higher your percentage body fat compared to your muscle mass, the more insulin resistant you are. And what should you want? You should want to be less insulin resistant. And how do you get there? You become more lean, more muscular, more cardiometabolic imbalance, and less inflamed. And it works pretty much every time it's successfully tried.
So how much of that diet ends up being keto-ish, or is it keto? Is it keto or carnivore, or where do keto and carnivore fall into the diet stuff that you're looking at?
Well, I'm certainly, there are experts that do this, all day long and talk about it on podcasts all day long, and write papers. Would say it's not that simple, but in my mind, it's just anything that limits the intake of sugar and and by the way, artificial sweeteners, have much the same metabolic effect. And plus, they also, it's like you wouldn't say to somebody that a problem, with alcohol, just drink, low alcohol beer, you'll be fine. It's a gateway drug, to the real thing. And so, it stimulates the sweet tooth, it keeps it strong, it leads to relapse. So, but I think the key thing, whether it's keto, I mean, to me, keto is carnivore with plants.
Right.
Both basically shift our metabolism more toward ketosis and away from, metabolizing glucose.
Right.
But the problem is we can't possibly metabolize all the glucose and use it for energy that we ingest if we're eating a SAD. The standard American diet has to be stored as fat.
Right.
And so it becomes a toxin. So, and nobody has shown that there's really any downside to ketosis or getting closer to it.
Right.
I mean, in my mind, tell me if you think there is, but the problem, if there is a harm, the thing that protects us is it's really difficult to stay on it, consistently. But
and especially
the more we do anything,
especially in our Western culture, it's just,
right.
It's like, well, I'll just have a small piece of cheesecake, just a chunk, just a quarter. That's a small piece, right?
Yeah. Well,
you can make that somewhat keto, at least the cheesecake.
Yeah, it's like,
but I agree that then triggers the sweet tooth, and then someone's like, well, maybe a bag of chips, but yesterday I did that, so it just becomes a downfall.
It's just too easy. It's everywhere. It's in our sight all the time. It's on the media all the time. One of the best things I have a lot less exposure to television today and more podcasts. And I think that's had a lot to do with making it, when I start watching, I'm in a friend's house and I'm seeing cable TV and all the crap, starts to, all the memories come flooding back. I mean, it's like taking an alcoholic into a bar or a kegger. It's just really dangerous.
And
so I think the other thing I'll mention is that I always tell patients, look, it won't be your worst enemy that's going to undermine you. It'll be your closest friend, maybe your spouse, it'll be your family members.
Yep.
I made this just for you. These are your favorite, and I brought you some comfort food. And so I call it the crab bucket syndrome or the tall poppy syndrome.
Yes, very much so.
And so one of the things that I really try to engage, besides the fact that it's generally a good patient recruiting tool, is if I'm taking care of a husband and, I want to get their partner too, because they'll either mutually reinforce each other or they'll undermine each other. And we soon pretty well find out which is which.
Yep.
Good point.
Does that fit with your experience?
Oh, definitely.
For sure.
And I was going to say, for I think all three of us, if we ever need comfort food, it should be a comfort brisket.
I love me some brisket.
No sauce. We can do sauce later. We can figure that out.
You guys live in the same town, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Sugar makes a mean brisket. So if he hasn't brought you any, I think you should guilt him into bringing you some.
Okay. I'll hold you to that.
Apparently, I'm bringing you a brisket next time I'm coming in for an in-body.
That's right.
I love brisket.
Question. Do you mind if I ask another question?
Go.
Okay. So we've also done a podcast or two on statin medications. And I don't want to get you in trouble, but we have kind of mixed reviews and thoughts about statins. And obviously we've talked a lot about how pro-inflammatory diet causes an increase in a lot of the cholesterol numbers, and that statin medications might not be the first line of defense to reduce those numbers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I use it as a backstop, as a safety precaution. I'm always emphasizing, less inflammatory diet, exercise. I talked about the 9 S's, but let's be realistic. I mean, very few people are going to be that, compulsive, that compliant, that fastidious. The problem with statins, as I see it, as I used to prescribe it, as I used to prescribe them, is too high a doses of the wrong statin for the wrong reason. So, I see if somebody coming to me with on a atorvastatin 80 milligrams because their LDL cholesterol was too high. I mean, that kind of sums up all three. I prescribe low doses, like 5 milligrams 3 times a week.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Of rosuvastatin for the purpose of reducing inflammation and following the markers that we look at for inflammation in the blood, like LPPLA2 and C-reactive protein, microalbumin to creatinine ratio, and also intima media thickness on the carotid artery scan. So hopefully we do have a moment or two to talk about that. But the point is, I have seen what happens when people don't take the statins in terms of those inflammatory markers, and I've seen what happens when they do. And I strongly believe in these multiple N of 1 experiments, which is the one that really matters, that one, you know, what it does in that individual person. I've seen improvement in arterial age, intima media thickness, and with the statins, and when they stop taking it, I can tell. And I've done it in myself, you know, because one time I did, you know, it's like I was heavily involved in the CrossFit, you know, culture, working out all the time. Oh no, these muscle aches aren't CrossFit; they're the suicide. Well, no, it was the CrossFit.
Yeah.
And my arterial age went up by 10 years in 6 months, and I went back on and went back down. Now, is that anecdotal? Well, sort of, but it's my anecdote, so it counts.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the key thing though is not to rely on them, you know, to say this is going to fix all your problems. For instance, the whole issue with statins causing type 2 diabetes. I do believe that high dose statins prescribed to somebody who doesn't do anything about their diet, keeps the same starchy sweet diet, they're going to get type 2 diabetes just with the passage of time. But somebody who at the same time modifies their diet, you know, and sees a reduction in their body fat and their visceral fat, where the judge gives them good reports on the in-body, I don't think I've seen a single case of progression. In fact, I see regression in hemoglobin A1C as a surrogate marker for insulin resistance, which, by the way, one of the things that the in-body also reports is their visceral fat levels. So I think there is a downward trend in visceral fat is as reliable an indicator of improving insulin resistance or improved insulin sensitivity. So anyway, going back, I think I always, first of all, I ask the patient, if I say the word statin, what does that elicit? Because in a fairly health conscious patient population, which tends to be the people that gravitate toward me more, so and probably to you guys as well, there is a lot of statin, I think, phobia, and some of it is justified. So I always try to classify, are you a statin intolerant? In other words, you've taken them and you don't tolerate them. You've tried several. Okay, that's one thing. How high was the dose? Because at a lower dose, we may get the benefit without the downside. But then there are some people who just basically are convinced and they are not open to it. Okay, fine. There are alternatives. I mean, one of my favorite supplements is bergamot or berberine.
Got it.
It has such favorable effects on inflammation, on insulin sensitivity, which of course that's another, I mean, saying the same thing, it's inflammation, some improvement in the LDL and HDL and triglycerides. So I think that's a good alternative, but reality is, you know, sometimes compliance gets to be an issue because these supplements can become, you know, expensive, maybe especially in a, you know, as budgets get tighter, inflation and food and everything else is a problem. I have to be, you know, because it doesn't do any good if it's a great program in theory, but in practice they aren't actually doing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, niacin I think is underutilized as an anti-inflammatory and a lipid modifying agent. You know, the flushing is annoying, but it's not dangerous. And so and there are other tricks, you know, red yeast rice, you know, I have seen that be effective in some folks, although the truth of the matter is that red yeast rice is in fact molecularly still a statin. So if you take a high enough dose, you can, you know, still get the statin related side effects. So, you know, but sometimes, you know, what you call it matters. You know, people will get the nocebo effect, the placebo effect. So we have to keep all those things in mind, which is what makes this kind of, it's still, I don't care how long I've continued to practice this, it will always be challenging because at the end of the day, we're dealing with people.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Which what makes it half the fun, because
of course,
you know, they're on this journey just as much as we are. You mentioned something, well, you mentioned carotid Dopplers and carotid health. And I think, you had some slides you wanted to share on that as well.
Yeah.
But my question is how does carotid health, obviously we can measure that easily because it's right here in the neck, but how does that relate to the rest of the body?
Well, I mean, our arteries are the blood supply to every one of our organs. It's a very, if you have a plugged artery, to an organ, that organ's going to suffer damage. So if it's your heart, you're going to have a heart attack. It's your brain, you're going to have a stroke and a neurological deficit. It's your kidneys, you're going to lose kidney function, be dialysis ultimately. So in my mind, there's no single place to focus that has more bang for the buck than to improve the health of your arteries.
Got it.
So if you are reducing inflammation in the arterial wall, you're going to see a reduction in generalized body inflammation. Why? Because all the things you're doing to improve the arteries are going to have a favorable effect on everything else. Better diet, more exercise, avoiding toxins, etc. So, and the beauty of it is it's so measurable, and especially now, this is a tool I think I just looked it up. The company was founded in 2017. It's called Butterfly IQ. For less than $4,000, you can own this. It's extremely durable. It plugs into a smartphone or other tablet device.
Nice.
And so I have adopted the approach that scan first and ask questions later. And what I'll show you, let's see,
You should still have it.
And for those that are interested, these images are on my website, the CureCenter.life/images. So arterial disease is really an inflammatory condition inside the artery wall. So one of the things we were talking about, and this actually kind of illustrates it. I've got a bad picture on here. And actually it's not that bad. So this still shows that the endothelium is here. The disease process is inside the wall of the artery, but it's not. I can show you some others where it's just like they show like chewing gum, globbed inside the artery.
Right.
Lumen. But the lumen only becomes compromised in very late stage disease. So here's this. Forget about the blood clot for the moment, but that's where you'll get fail a stress test, or get chest pain or similar symptoms. But the disease process begins with inflammation in the wall of the artery and forms plaque. So I use the analogy of acne. So acne is an inflammatory condition of the skin. You get pimples rupture, and they tend to rupture. And plaque is true also when they first form. So plaque goes through a healing process. So that's shown here ultrasonographically. So this is a atherosclerotic plaque with areas of essentially it's like a little abscess. And if that abscess breaks through this thin fibrous cap, it triggers a blood clot forming, and that's how you get occlusion of the lumen of the artery downstream, in this case in the carotid arteries. But over time, if we manage the lifestyle and supplements and medications properly, that becomes, instead of a fresh pimple, it becomes a scar. So people ask me, well, can I get rid of the plaque? No, but you can heal it.
Right.
Will my plaque break off? No, but it can break and lead to a blood clot. So that's the problem. So with this ultrasound device, we can visualize the intima media layer, which is this here. And this is some very early plaque. I'll just show you an example. This was I did this scan on a young man, age 40, and we were actually doing a family. It was a father and 3 brothers. So it was like my 3 sons. You guys may not be old enough to remember my 3 sons.
I do remember that. Yeah.
So anyway, father actually in his 70s actually looked pretty good. Oldest son, age 50, had type 1 diabetes, looked pretty good. Youngest son, 40, very health conscious, looked pretty good. Here's a 43-year-old, I think, and he's got this thickening in the artery wall here. I'm looking at the artery in cross section, and then he's got this. This is all atherosclerotic plaque here in his carotid bulb, and what caused that? Well, we went through the process of evaluating. He's actually suffering also from symptoms of long COVID, so I think that has something to do with it. And by the way, I think the vaccines, and I think spike protein, whether you got it by infection or injection, is pro-inflammatory, and
Yeah.
there's a logical mechanism by which this has been happening. So then we can look at his artery wall, the artery wall thickness here, and this takes about 5 minutes to do, and I can teach it to anybody who's has one of these. I could have somebody doing at least that initial view, the short axis view, within a matter of minutes.
Nice.
And after you've done about 20 of them, you'll be pretty good at getting this image as well. So I'm on a mission to make this the scanning, this identification of this disease more ubiquitous, more widespread. Because it's like cancer screening. The earlier you find it, the better your chances of avoiding the consequences.
Right. So just to follow up on this, because this was sort of getting to, because obviously we can measure the carotid easiest, but how does, obviously this wasn't uniformly diseased along the artery. How does, I mean, obviously, and the other thing is the carotid's like super important because it goes to your brain, and if a clot breaks off, I mean, your brain's going to have problems almost immediately. But how much does this translate to like something in the leg or something, viscerally? I mean, is it just, or is it just giving us a picture that says, hey, if it's here, it's a little bit of everywhere?
What you just said, the last thing. And so if you see it in the carotid arteries, it's safe to presume, or you should presume, it's also present in the coronary arteries.
Got it.
Arteries to the kidneys, everywhere. If you don't see it in the carotids, you may want to take another look. You can look at the aorta, the femoral arteries, coronary arteries we can't get to with ultrasound, but you can do a coronary artery calcium score. But the point is to find out, do you in fact have this disease? Because that's sort of the that's got your attention. But here's the key. If we can measure the artery wall thickness, so for instance, this is an example of a gentleman age 60, a fit long distance bicycle enthusiast. If you looked at him, he'd look healthier than any of us in this room. But he had very significant, so this is a more complete examination. He had very significant atherosclerotic plaque in his carotid arteries. And we said, okay, let's look at your diet. Well, one of the things that a lot of long distance athletes do is carbohydrate load.
Yes, they
do. And if
do.
you have insulin resistance, and he does, so we got him to address that. Yes, I did finally convince him to try low dose statin. So this was changing his carbohydrate loading. Then we added a statin, so his arterial wall got thinner. So then we come up with this construct called the vascular age. So this is, at what age would this number be at the 50th percentile? Because in the population, on average, artery wall thickness increases as the population grows older. Men thicker than women, but the goal is to see this come down over time. So the key concept is, if his artery wall is getting thinner in his carotids, what do you think is happening in his other arteries?
Right. Yeah, there's going to be problems everywhere. So
So it's such an easy, non-invasive, relatively economical way to monitor arterial disease. It's very visual, it's very compelling, and so it's great to be able to sit down with a patient and say, I mean, look what happened here. Your artery age dropped by 16 years in less than a year. So, and that's what we do. And they say, yes, patients, it's kind of gamifies their care.
Right. So, and it, between December and July there, his went back up. So now he's now he can come back and say, oh, what did I do differently that I need to go back to?
Yeah.
And typically going back to our statin story, this is before he accepted taking a low dose statin. This is after. This is when he thought he didn't need the statin anymore.
Got it. So yes, and shoot, I think what was it? When my dad had his heart attack more than a decade ago now, mild, lost less than 10% of the heart. They put him on a statin. They did a stent. He's got to take the blood thinner for the stent, till forever. But the statin was not, it was something he would have to take a couple times a day. And your approach definitely sounds like, hey, take it as much as you absolutely need it. And now we have, and you have data to show why you need it. Whereas unfortunately, I see too many people come in, they're like, yeah, my doctor just prescribed this to me. And like, well, what are they measuring to know that that it's helping you? So it's just fantastic there.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Well, I always say when I hear that, it's like they're like children running around with a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail, and that's the tool that they have. And unfortunately, it's institutionalized into guidelines. It's how they're measured for their effectiveness, for their adherence to these guidelines.
Right.
I've been around long enough to know, evidence-based medicine is just starting, and like every good thing, it seemed like a good idea, but there were unintended consequences, and now everything has come to the point where it's like not how did each individual patient do, is how did you manage the population as a whole. So it's a one size fits nobody kind of an approach.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's a
my biggest
pendulum
beef
swing.
with mainstream medicine today.
Yeah, and that's just a pendulum swing as things go back and forth. And I think I think we definitely, especially after everything that we went through in COVID, I really feel like that institutional capture was largely responsible for why COVID was so bad, as far as taking care of people and making approaches to say, hey, what novel drugs do we have? Not novel, what established drugs do we have that might be able to treat this like we would treat anything else off label until we have something, firm. And I think we're seeing the end of that pendulum shift back towards, something that makes better sense. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I think there are those of us, I suspect the three of us were ahead of the curve, in terms of our spidey sense or our common sense or whatever you might want to call it, saying, or our BS meters were saying, wait a minute, no vaccine is considered safe and effective until it's been studied for 20 years. And all of a sudden, 6 months out, this is, declaration, as opposed to trusting us with the truth that says, if you're older than life expectancy with morbidities and high risk of dying, maybe it's worth taking the risk of this new and novel agent. But for everybody else on down the road to pregnant women, to toddlers, let's wait and see. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that just told me volumes, like, wait a minute, you guys are completely full of it.
Right.
And you're not to be trusted. And there's something else going on here.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole vitamin D story was just amazing to me. In 3 months, we knew that very low vitamin D levels were the ultimate comorbidity for death from COVID.
Yes.
And that's why, our powers that be made sure that everybody got a 90-day supply of vitamin D sent to them in the mail until, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, that didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Speaking of which, did you see the Medscape article that came up about a couple days ago? That I think the Endo Society or something like that, and some endocrine society basically said, stop testing vitamin D altogether because we don't know what levels are good. And maybe you're taking too much.
Yeah, they're trying to scare people.
Well, here's, Risky Business, the movie, The Pimp, played by one of my favorite actors, Joey Pentagliano, standing next to Joel. He says, Joel, I'm paraphrasing, you're messing with my business plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so.
They don't want anybody messing with the business plan.
No.
Yeah.
Now that sounds really crass and accusatory, but if they don't want us to be accusing them of their bad behavior, why do they keep behaving so badly?
Exactly.
And so when you look at the consequences, well, I'm kind of a walking cliche. I just messed up. But Upton Sinclair said the surest way to make a man not understand something is to make a salary dependent upon not understanding it. And so there are many, many aligned forces that establish that this, if you have a very inexpensive dietary supplement that we all know we should have, that based on our human history, that can eliminate the need for all the pharmaceutical solutions to all the many of the chronic diseases that we're afflicted by. Is that good for business? Is reversible arterial disease good for cardiovascular programs with stents and surgery and cardiac rehab and stroke rehab? And no, it's terrible. And I will also add, and by the way, the insurance, the payers are part of the problem too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because one of the things that many people don't realize, maybe you figure this out, but with the Affordable Care Act, the mandatory medical loss ratio is the terminology for it. They said insurer, you have to pay out at least 85% of what you take in. In medical claims, you can't take in $1, pay out only 60 and keep 40 cents. That's no longer. So how do you grow that 15%, for administration? And if you become a credit card company, casino, a bank, you have to pay out more to justify charging more. And that's why you see these double-digit increases in health insurance costs every year. And nobody's talking about bending the curve, because now everybody's in it. The insurers prior to that, had a tendency to want to control costs.
Right.
No more.
No, they don't.
Yeah. Growth's good for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been, I know Dr. Bagley and myself are both out of network for everything except Medicare. And getting back to credit card companies, the interesting thought, I don't know how much Medicare you deal with, but when we get payments, and sometimes it's like for $5, maybe $10, they'll send a fax with a credit card that could be forgotten. They could have sent a fax with a e-check that you could just do direct deposit, but no, they did it with a credit card on purpose so that you might just forget about it, and then they'll keep their $5, $10, and that'll add up over time. So it's just the whole system's broken. And like I said, I hope we're coming around to the end of the pendulum for those things to change. Since we're talking weight loss and health, I wanted to get your take on Ozempic real quick.
I'm not going to prescribe it. I just tell my patients, period. I'm not going to judge anybody who decides to do it, but they need to know this the whole story. It's not magic. In fact, I was just watching. It's so interesting how this is kind of getting into, my version of popular media. Pierce Morgan did an interview with included Dr. Jason Fung in his panel, and I was shocked when Jason Fung was well known for the obesity code, intermittent. He's the father of intermittent fasting, right?
Right.
So he said he's been prescribing Ozempic for his patients for weight loss for 5 years.
Really?
As part of the program. So he's I think his attitude about them is like my attitude about statins. It's like it has a role, but shouldn't be the centerpiece. But in reality, I think it's really dangerous. Not just in terms of side effects. We all talk about gastroparesis and severe constipation, and patients showing up for surgery with a stomach full of food in spite of the fact they've been NPO for 24 hours because that's part of how it works is gastroparesis. It does give you satiety, but it's like everything else. It's a real fad, and it's being any substance can be used or it can be abused. And I think it's something that's very prone to abuse. I don't think I can be credible with somebody and say really the linchpin should be eat a healthier, less inflammatory diet. And if your obesity is really that's really the thing, then you go see somebody who will offer it to you. And if it's successful, okay, fine, I won't judge you for it. But one thing that people need to be aware is, and I haven't seen a lot of data on this, but a significant part, our goal is to lose fat and retain muscle.
Right.
Whereas with Ozempic, it's I would say ideal is if you can lose 5 pounds of fat and only lose 1 pound of muscle at the same time, that's pretty good. But with Ozempic, it's there is a significant amount of muscle loss, and that can't be good in the long run.
Right. Again,
and then when this is not a again, obesity is not an Ozempic deficiency.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that and this was the one more striking than the muscle loss, which personally, as I've stated already, is probably the worst thing you can do after certainly the age of 35, definitely after the age of 25, because it's just hard. You don't have the metabolism, you don't have the hormone factors running when we're older as we are when we were younger to build muscle. But the other thing that is just as staggering is, for the price alone, to do your program is and lose probably the same amount of mass as it is on Ozempic. If you just compared apples to apples, as far as just the straight weight loss. They're basically saying in 6 months, if you change your diet or 6 months of Ozempic, you lose about the same amount of weight. Obviously, probably more muscle mass on that program. And shoot, I've heard the price tag on that thing, and I suspect you are still cheaper than that.
Yeah, in fact, you just made me think of a potentially probably unethical way of going about this. Is I'll give you Ozempic, but it'll be a saline injection every week, and you have to come in and see the judge to prove that it's working.
Exactly.
And oh, by the way, you might want to try eating less sweets and starches.
Right.
One other thing I'll just mention: we keep talking about muscle mass, and it's important. And you can check me on this, but I believe that one of the things that happens two things happen during fasting endocrinologically that are beneficial. Testosterone levels rise, and it's actually logarithmic. So the longer you fast, the more dramatic is the rise. And the same thing is true of growth hormone.
Yeah.
So both are pro. They're the opposite of catabolic. They build muscle mass. So to me, if nothing else, if I'm a bad boy otherwise, if I just don't eat until 11 o'clock in the morning and I stop eating at 6,
Yes.
that's more than, I'd say that's a significant benefit, or get sicker less fast. I don't know, but I think everybody can do that.
Yes. No, and I agree. And I think that's the easy one. I'm sort of torn because I'm going back and forth on that same concept, but not so much waiting till 11, but breaking the fast early in the morning and eating lunch, and then not eating something at dinner time, except for we have our Western society, and we are socialized to have dinner together. So, but I think there might be there in my brain, I can't do it. I've tried. I'm still trying to get to make the switch, but I think there's something to eating breakfast when you wake up, and then lunch, and then skipping dinner. But
yeah,
again,
that's the hardest one for me. If I can skip breakfast all the time, but skipping dinner is harder for me. But you know what? I'm gonna get a continuous blood glucose monitor and see which one works better for me. It's the information.
Well, I think the number one concept is that our bodies do better when we're stressed, physically stressing it. We're too easy on ourselves. So, whether it's, and tricking the body into adjusting to changes in environment, I think that's the way we were made. We've evolved. That's how we do it best. And, that's why I think, things like, cold water or ice plunges or cold showers, it's like our society has made us so lacking in resiliency because we no longer stimulate resiliency. So I think the same thing, is true. If 2 days out of the week you can, eat the last meal, if nothing else, just eat it early, like 3 or 4 o'clock, earlier than normally would. So you have that longer period of house cleaning that happens during fasting, because those insulin levels. The key thing is not how low the blood glucose goes; is how low the insulin levels stay.
Right.
And that's the dirty little secret. And it's like when you put somebody with type 2 diabetes on insulin, it's just so crazy, I guess is the best word for it. One of the patients I love to show is this is a little different case. So this was a 75-year-old type 2 diabetes on 3 blood pressure medicines, three diabetes medicines plus insulin. And in 3 years, we dropped his arterial age from 68 to 44.
Nice.
While getting him off of, and all we had to do was say, Tom, after all these years, do you think you can cut out sugar? And he did. And he was able to get off 6 medications and insulin. And this is somebody who had bypass surgery, I think 8 or 9 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never too late, to change and leverage these things. Now, full disclosure, sad to say, about a year later, he was diagnosed with acute leukemia. Now that's just one of those act of God kind of things. But I certainly don't think that his life was worse off for having done these things before he developed acute leukemia and died in about 6 weeks.
Sure.
So none
Along
of us
those
are getting
lines.
out alive, but we
Yeah.
can
No,
certainly
you're right.
make it more like this as opposed to this, steady
Ex-
downhill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask, because this is something we're seeing more and more, that I remember one lecturer basically said the things that would have that get us today as we, as medicine becomes more modernized, quicker to take care of some of these acute problems like a heart attack or cancer. Those two are not we're living longer, and now we're getting into more neurodegenerative diseases getting us. How do you view the arterial side of things leading to to the neurodegenerative problems? I mean, obviously your 9S's are right there.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with that. But what else do you see along those lines?
Well, I think a lot of what is diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease is actually vascular dementia.
Yes.
So in other words, it's not, you don't get one sizable blood clot clotting off a branch vessel to your motor cortex and develop paralysis, but you might get a tiny little microthrombus that travels downstream from a micro rupture, and over a period of time, you get a kind of the Swiss cheese effect.
Right.
So there's that, and in fact, so I think, let's put it this way: every lifestyle modification that improves arterial health
Mhm.
certainly doesn't cause more Parkinson's disease, more Alzheimer's disease. In fact, the same things that, so for instance, if you want to do a comparison to beat the heart attack gene, I'm sorry, a healthy heart, healthy brain,
Mm-hmm.
and Dale Bredesen's book, on the end of Alzheimer's, there's so much overlap. If you did a Venn diagram, the things that are recommended are very similar. So,
Right.
so I think, as because I guess what you're saying is it implies that, well, these things, although they're more common as we get older,
Right.
are they normal? Are they part of normal aging?
Correct.
No, they're just more common because the cumulative effect of these bad habits, the lifestyle choices that our culture enforces, the toxins we encounter. We haven't talked about air pollution. Unfortunately, we live here in Springfield, we have less of a problem with air pollution than, say, in a city like St. Louis or Chicago.
Yeah, but we've got all
those
the
are factors.
glyphosate spray and all the
Oh,
the stuff
geez,
coming from the field. So let's
Oh
not
my
even.
gosh.
I
Yeah.
don't know which one's worse, quite honestly.
Yeah, one of my
Pollution.
moral dilemmas is one of my patients is a crop duster,
Yeah.
and I
Oh,
don't even want to ask him what he's spraying,
Nope.
oh yeah,
but but he's very health conscious for himself, so I'm gonna. But yeah, well, that not only that, but how much glyphosate. I mean, one of the most eye-opening lectures I ever listened to was from a emeritus plant botanist, or from a plant biologist, Purdue, explaining how glyphosate works.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically is a chelating agent, and it depletes the plant of nitrogen and other micronutrients, and that's how it kills the weed. And the GMO, the Roundup Ready, plants are engineered to where that has less of an impact. But the glyphosate is not supposed to accumulate in the plants. It's not supposed to accumulate in the soil. It's all BS.
Oh yeah.
It's all there.
Well, and on top of that, along those lines of the chelating agent, it also binds up all the magnesium in the soil. So now we don't have,
everyone's magnesium
food.
deficient.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's probably one that I need to be paying more attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for reminding me of that. So anyway, there's, I guess, from my point of view, that I try to tell people, yes, you can see the threat, but you can, I don't want to say eliminate it, but you can largely,
Yes.
eliminate the threat.
Yeah.
You can see it reverse, and it's not as difficult as one might believe. You don't have to.
Oh, sure.
It's just make that series of nudge
Mhm.
movements to better outcomes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my thought on that is, what are like your top 3 supplements that you almost always recommend to people?
Well, vitamin D with K2.
Yeah.
I won't mention the proprietary names, but
Sure.
the high quality, reliable manufacturer. And
we use orthobiotics too. So that's,
yeah.
I know you guys like that one.
Orthomolecular, yeah.
Or orthomolecular.
I'd say people, and I can often, I can't always, but I can often tell when they substitute it. So K4 for the equivalent, bergamot BPF for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Niacin, but particularly for people with elevated lipoprotein A, which by the way is a genetically determined lipid abnormality. It affects about 30% of the population,
Wow.
and it can have a meaningful impact, especially if you have a family history. Trying to think. Folic acid. I see a lot. A chiropractor about 3 years ago said, "Are you checking homocysteine? It's a lot more hyperhomocysteine is a lot more common than you think." And then, so I don't. It could check the MTHFR gene variant, but my preference is just see what if their homocysteine level is high. Supplement with folic acid.
Right.
And it's as you do the methylated folic.
Yeah. My preference is methyl B12. It's the orthomolecular version. I'm sure there are others that, and I'm not an expert. I sort of go like, okay, what's the recommendation? Just this is because it's problem, solution, measure, and if they and it's amazing how again if the changes aren't happening, it's like I don't understand. Can you help me understand why this isn't moving? It's like, well, I ran out of the or I forgot to get it, or so one of the I hook everybody up with an account on an online dispensary so they can get it. It helps us sometimes I just have to work with people on what's the most important one or two because I can't afford all three or whatever. So it's that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah,
it does.
It does. And there's so many things that I've got a bunch back here, but and it's not I would do magnesium fish oils and D3 as well with some sort of K subs supplement along that. So because I think those are also driving a lot of that same anti-inflammatory process, and especially when we're deficient in something like magnesium. So
awesome.
Well, vitamin D drives insulin resistance. Low vitamin D is associated with insulin resistance, and vitamin K2 also reduces insulin resistance. So, and since it's something that's so ubiquitous, almost like universal, to me, those are kind of like everybody ought to be doing that.
Especially if you're up north of certain parallel. I mean, like
especially
we're in the same. Yeah, we have to have it in the winter for sure.
Yeah. Do you have 30 what is it, milligrams or micrograms per deciliter is the low end, basically. That's like the definite problem zone. But do you have a higher number that you like to get your patients to, or a higher minimum that you like to get your patients to?
I shoot for 60 to 90 as I think a safe range, both from an effectiveness and the whole toxicity with vitamin D is so overblown again by the the fear mongers. Stay away from that thing that might actually save you. It's like that 1% possibility you might get kidney stones if your vitamin D level is so. And I mean, obviously, we measure. I typically measure the vitamin D level at least once a year, but preferably twice a year. And frankly, for the most part, insurance isn't covering. But one of the things, you look at how things are organized and incentivized, and maybe you know this already, but cost of a vitamin D level in the lab that I use, if you walk in and say, I want a vitamin D level without my insurance paying for it, over $200.
Yeah.
And the same is true for homocysteine. So what does that tell us about what they want us to know? They don't want you to know about your homocysteine levels or your vitamin D levels. There's a disincentive. And yet if it's billed to me, I think both of them are in the like $10 to $15 range.
Right. And in fact, I just got a all cash rate through Quest recently as well. And again, it's like $10 to $15 for both of those. And I'm like, and those are the expensive ones in my list. It's like, I can get a whole CBC for like $5. And I'm like, really? But it comes back to all the way the insurance games are getting played to who's getting their pockets lined and such like that. So
it's like the things that would hurt the business model to be known or extremely expensive, and and this is one of the areas where I'm a little bit leery about, like testing for early cancers. Early, the MRI, total body MRI, the blood test, 90, cancer Mark, as well. That's really good for oncology treatment business.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know, the hell with how the toxicity to the patient and how many of those, minimal, cancers are actually self-limited, or, so we can go, that could be a whole nother afternoon worth of discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I would love to have you back on
Definitely.
offer another podcast if you would be willing, because this has been so incredible. What, tell me more about.
I'm kind of shy and I don't like to say too much. So.
No, it's fantastic. For our listeners and watchers, where can they find you?
I'd say the best thing would be to go to my website, thecurecenter.life. I'm located in Springfield, Illinois, but I would say the majority of my encounters now, my consultations are actually done on telemedicine.
Fantastic.
We can use most communities have a Quest lab facility, and the number of locations where we can get them their carotid ultrasound done is growing. And so just go to thecurecenter.life, and if you want to go /discovery-call, discovery-call, that page, they can register for no cost, no obligation discovery call. And regardless of what their interest is, we can kind of figure out, okay, this is a good fit for you. We can do this, or, maybe this isn't the right thing, for you.
Man,
we'll get that on our, when we post the podcast, we'll make sure that those links are available.
Yes,
okay.
For sure.
Yeah, I'll just put them in the chat.
Sounds good.
Amazing. And Dr. Sugar, where can they find you if they will need an upper cervical chiropractor?
I'm at Keystone Chiropractic, KeystoneChiroSPI.com, Springfield, Illinois. Find us on all the socials.
And I'm Dr. Beth Bagley. I'm in St. Louis, PrecisionChiroSTL.com and socials, all that stuff.
Yep. All right, folks, make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast. We appreciate you joining us for this one. Like I said, we'll definitely see about having Dr. Backs back another time for more fun and discussions on things. So, all right, folks, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
That's all for today's episode of The Blonde and the Bald. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed today's show with Drs. Bagley and Sugar, remember, don't give up and just live with the pain. Come back next week and get more answers and solutions. Visit our websites at KeystoneChiroSPI.com and PrecisionChiropracticSTL.com for more info, and catch all the episodes of The Blonde and the Bald.